Welcome to the video, everybody. My name is Luke McMillan, and I'm the physical exercise specialist for Base Gagetown. Now, I work under Krista Davidson, and she's the reconditioning manager here, and together we work to help rehab those who are struggling with injuries or chronic disease here on base. Okay, so last time that I made a video, I went over neutral spine, bracing, and breathing. And those things will be very important to remember prior to today's video. Today's video is all about building your core. So we're going to go over a ton of very safe and effective core exercises to help progress your training, whether you're training for performance or rehab, your general population, you're an athlete, you're training for spec ops. It doesn't really matter. These are very effective and safe core exercises, but we need to keep in mind what we learned in the last video, okay? And I'll link that video that I made prior in the description below. So if you have time, I suggest checking out that video prior to watching this video, because the information there will really help you set your foundation prior to trying these core exercises. Okay, so very quick review from the last video. We went over neutral spine. What did we learn about that? Well, we learned that we don't have a perfectly straight spine. We have a natural S shape to our spine. We are naturally lordotic, or slightly extended in the lower back or the lumbar spine, and we're naturally kyphotic, or slightly flexed in the upper back or the T-spine or the thoracic spine. Okay, so that's important to note, and if you can't really picture it, that's completely fine. Go back to that last video I made, and I go over it pretty quickly so you can grasp it efficiently, and you can move back into this video. Now, the next thing we went over in the last video is bracing. Okay, so bracing is going to be very important, and we'll lightly review that prior to some of the core exercises today. But what's the basics of bracing? Well, first we want to create torque in our feet, right? We want to externally rotate at the hips. We want to engage our glutes to set that neutral pelvis. We want to create intra-abdominal pressure to help really stabilize the lower back. We also want to pack our shoulder girdle, tuck our chin, engage those deep cervical flexors. These are all things that we are doing while we're bracing during our main lifts. Okay, so while we're partaking in the core exercises today, it's important that we practice bracing. We don't want to be passive while we're going through these exercises. We want to get the most bang for our buck while we're going through these exercises and really engage those abdominal musculature and ensure that our spine is nice and safe. Okay, makes sense? The last thing we went over in last video is breathing. We talked about pursed lips a little bit, just slightly bringing air in and slightly pushing air out. We talked about the Valsalva maneuver and how there's sometimes that can sometimes be unsafe if we're holding our breath for a long time during some compound lifts, and we would just suggest maybe pursed lips, but the Valsalva maneuver would help stabilize the lower back. But let's practice our pursed lips, our sucking air in slightly and pushing air out slightly as well, ensuring there's constant airflow in and out. And we're going to practice our bracing, and we're going to ensure that we have a neutral spine during all of these core exercises. Now, Stuart McGill, if you haven't heard of him, it's Dr. Stuart McGill, and he's dedicated the majority of his professional research in life to back health. Okay, and he's gone over effective and safe core exercises that we can employ so that we don't get injured in the future. All right? And we know that, or if we don't know, we should know that the core musculature is there to what? It's not there to create movement. That's not its main function. It's there to prevent or limit excessive or unwanted motion. Okay, so that's very important to note. The core musculature is there to prevent or limit excessive or unwanted motion. It's not necessarily always there to create movement. Okay, I wouldn't say that that's its main function. However, there are some athletes that would require the core musculature to create a lot of movement and a lot of power, like, for example, an MMA athlete. And over time, if they're in a position that's not neutral spine, their collagen fibers in their spine and whatnot, these can adapt for high-performance athletes. Okay, but for general population, we're going to want to ensure that we have a neutral spine, we brace and stiffen the core, and then we move accordingly and breathe. Okay, makes sense? So let's get right into it with the Stu McGill Big 3. That will be the first set of exercises that we're going to go over, and those consist of the curl up, modified curl up, side plank, and bird dog. Okay, those are the Stu McGill Big 3. So those are Dr. McGill's Big 3 core exercises that he suggests that you should be doing that are safe and effective. And then I've got a mixture of other exercises that I want to throw in this video that I believe, in my professional opinion, are safe and effective as well. So you can try these exercises with me. You can try them right at home there if you would like. Very, very limited equipment is required. Actually, no equipment is required today. So you can just get out a yoga mat or out on the carpet or whatever and try these core exercises with me. Let's get right into it. As I mentioned, the first 3 exercises that we're going to go over today are called the Stu McGill Big 3, or the McGill Big 3. The first one we're going to review is called the bird dog. And this is a great exercise at desensitizing back pain, creating instability, and really working the core abdominal musculature. Okay? So let's get into it. So we're first going to be in a quadruped position here. That just means on all fours. The very first thing I want to do is ensure that I have a neutral spine. So remember, we talked about this. Our spine is not perfectly straight. We have a natural S shape. So what does that mean? If you didn't watch the video, we have a natural slight extension in our lumbar spine. We're slightly flexed or slightly kyphotic in our upper back region. Okay? And we should have a straight neutral neck and pelvis as well. Okay, so I've got a slight, so first of all, you can work around that lumbar spine to kind of figure out where you're most pain-free and comfortable. And for me, it's right about there. I have a very, very slight lower back extension. And then I'm going to engage the musculature of my T-spine, really reach those muscles up to the ceiling, and then tuck your chin and ensure that you have a neutral neck as well. And I don't have a mirror, but I'm hoping I'm right around neutral here. Now, if I had a stick running across my back, I would have 3 points of contact, meaning there would be a point of contact on the stick here, a point of contact on the stick in my upper back region, and a point of contact on the back of my head. And that's when you would understand that you have a nice neutral spine and natural curves. And from here, we're just going to engage and brace. We talked about bracing in the other video and how we want to really engage those core muscles and create intra-abdominal pressure. So we're working those muscles. So let's start by engaging and bracing down and getting prepared for our core movement. Now, the first progression to this exercise is actually just sticking the back leg out like this. Okay, so what I'm doing essentially is creating instability, and I'm engaging my core musculature to ensure that I'm not just taking the easy road and leaning over to one side or whatever the case may be. So my hips are squared, my shoulders squared, I'm braced, I have a neutral spine, and just kick out. Okay? And notice I'm not doing this. What happens when I start to do this? This is no longer a core exercise. You're really focusing on squeezing that glute, which this is a core exercise, but more importantly, it's unsafe because my lower back is now in a hyperextended position, which is definitely not optimal, and it's definitely not neutral, right? So we want to move safely, engage the core musculature, right? And just kick out. Point those toes towards the ground. You don't need that foot very high to create instability. The main goal of this exercise is to create instability, keep that lower back safe, and engage the core muscles and keep the hips and shoulders level. All right? From here, if you found that progression somewhat easy, then we can progress this into the full bird dog, okay? So, next I'm going to go into the same position here, and I'll do the other side just to kind of balance things out. I'm going to kick one leg, and I'm going to extend one arm, ensuring that I have a neutral spine. Notice I just have a fist up here, and I don't need to be way up here with it. I can just reach and have a fist and squeeze that fist and create stiffness and recruit a whole bunch of muscle fibers there and really brace down and engage the core musculature. So it just looks like this, and sweep down, as Stu McGill would say, and back up with the other side. Fist, point those toes towards the ground. You don't need it way up here. We just have a neutral spine. We're engaging our core. Sweep back down. So try this exercise at home. Remember, some common issues here are that people will raise that back leg way up too high, or they'll just kind of lean over to one side and really start to rotate or open up at the hips, okay? Meaning you're making the exercise easier on yourself. When we want to keep the hips level, the shoulders level, remove the bases of support, create instability, engage the core muscles, and just brace. We want to hold that for about 3 to 5 seconds, depending on your fitness level. Give that a try at home, and let's move on to the second exercise of the Stu McGill Big Three. The second exercise I wanted to go over today is called the modified curl up, or the curl up. And again, this is part of the Stu McGill Big Three, so let's get right into it. For this exercise specifically, we are going to be laying on our back. Okay, so if you're at home and you have a yoga mat or a carpet nearby, you can just start by laying on your mat. And from here, we're just going to raise one leg up at a bend, okay? The foot flat on the floor like this. Okay, so nothing's changed. My hips are still square and level. My shoulders are still square. And I'm looking right up at the ceiling. Okay, from here, I want to ensure that I have a neutral spine. So remember, we have natural curves, and I'm going to slip my hands underneath my lower back. So what's the point of this? Why is this effective? Well, a lot of exercises that you do laying on your back will, if you curl up, for example, your lower back will depress to the floor and ultimately lead in lumbar flexion, okay? If that back is slightly flexed or even flat there against the floor, we want to avoid that and maintain our natural lumbar spine curve. So all I'm doing is placing my hands under here, ensuring that I'm engaging my core still, and if you notice, my hands are preventing my spine from going in a compromised position, okay? So I'm just like this. Now from here, we can work the rectus abdominis and the transverse abdominis here by simply lifting up the head and imagining that there's a string on our chest just pulling straight up, okay? We don't want to picture that string pulling us forward so that we're curling like this. We want to ensure that we're picturing that string that's pulling us straight up to the ceiling, okay? And then we're going to hold for maybe 10 seconds depending on your fitness level, okay? So we're here, my hands are underneath my lumbar spine to ensure that I have a neutral spine, and I've got just one leg bent. And depending on if you have lower back pain, it really doesn't matter which leg, just as long as you're pain-free and you're in a nice, safe position with your spine here. And from here, I'm going to picture that the string is pulling my chest up, okay, and I'm holding for approximately 10 seconds, okay, and notice I'm not going forward with it. I don't have cervical flexion. I'm just picturing that string pulling me straight up to the ceiling, and then I'm right back down. And I'm really engaging my core muscles while I'm imagining that string pull me straight up to the ceiling. And once again, let's switch legs here just to show you on the other side if this is more pain-free for you. That string picks you up and we're engaging the core muscles, and it's pretty tough if you do it right. All right, and if you're finding any neck tension, you can always tuck your chin just a little bit, okay? And for about 10 seconds, and then we're back down. Just like that. And if you have a little bit of thoracic or upper back flexion, well, the thoracic spine is a little bit more of a mobile joint than the lumbar spine. The lumbar spine is definitely a stable joint structure, okay? So a little bit of slight flexion in the thoracic spine, maybe in the cervical spine a little bit, is much better than having flexion in the lumbar spine. So again, those hands are there to protect the lower back, and then we're picturing that string pulling our chest straight up to the ceiling. And let's move on to the third exercise of the Stu McGill Big Three. The third exercise of the Stu McGill Big Three is the side plank. And the first progression we're going to go over is just a modified side plank, okay? So this is a great exercise to work the lateral components of the core, the obliques and whatnot. And again, it's nice and safe. And the entire time you would be maintaining a neutral spine, okay, while bracing and stiffening up the abdominal wall. Now, for this exercise, we're going to start in a position just like this, our elbow underneath our shoulder joint, okay, and our knees just straight out like this. Okay, so we don't want to be passive in this position, even with our shoulder joint, okay? We want to be active. Engage the muscles of the rotator cuff. Ensure that my neck is neutral first thing out of the gate here, okay? So if my head is like this to start, and I raise up, then obviously my spine, my cervical spine, my neck is not neutral here, okay? So I want to first ensure that my neck is in a nice neutral, safe position in line with my spine, okay? And this shouldn't change. A lot of people will get up in the side plank and it will go this way or this way or this way. So ensure that you have a neutral spine and a neutral cervical spine as well, neutral neck. Okay, from here, I'm going to just simply raise my hips up like this, okay? So I'm really engaging the core muscles, and you notice that my neck didn't move, I don't think very much, and I've got a nice neutral spine, and I can put this opposite hand on the opposite hip, just like this. Okay, so that would be the modified version of the side plank. Now, the more advanced version would be a full side plank. And you can either have your feet like this, okay, so toe to heel type of setup there, or you can stack just like this. Just note that if you stack this position, then you're going to get a little bit more stress on the lateral component of this bottom knee here. Okay, so if you're fine with that, then you can raise up in this stacked position. If you have knee issues, I wouldn't suggest this stacked position. Active ankle, active knee. If that's giving you lateral knee pain there, then go with this position here, and we're going to just raise up. Exact same thing here, engaging the abdominal musculature, squeezing, bracing, neutral spine, neutral neck, and right back down. So that's a tough exercise there, guys, but very safe, very effective, neutral spine, and that would really help increase performance or better your rehab process. Let's move on to the variety of exercises that I'm going to throw into this video. That puts a conclusion to the Stu McGill Big Three. The first exercise that I threw into this mix here that I want to go over is something called the dead bug. So this is once again a very great, safe core exercise for general population, and we're going to start in a laying down position just like this, okay? So from here, I've got my hands over top of my shoulders, and then I've got my knees over top of my hips, okay, if that makes sense there. So I'm just up like this. And the first thing I want to do is recognize if I have an excessive lordotic spine,
I'm not sure if you guys can tell from the camera there, but right now my core is not active. So what happens is if my core is not engaged, it's going to allow for an anterior tilt in my pelvis, okay? And that's kind of what's happening here. And I have an excessive, for me, lower back extension here. Now remember, we do want a slight lower back extension, so I do not teach this exercise by completely pressing the lower back towards the ground. But you also do not want to be passive in this position and allow for an excessive lumbar extension here. So we're going to engage the core muscles and allow a slight extension, so I can still seat my hand through there, all right? But my core is engaged, my erectors are engaged, and everything's working together to stabilize this safe position here. And maybe you can just practice with this at first, because I can already feel this. I'm engaging my core muscles. I'm ensuring that I just have a slight extension in my lower back, and I'm squeezing really, really hard here on my core muscles, and I'm nice and stiff, okay? I'm stiff on the side, I'm stiff up top, all right? So from here, I've got my safe position down, and I'm already squeezing, and as I mentioned, I can already feel this. If you're doing it correctly, you're squeezing, okay? Don't let it go and allow for that excessive lower back position, lumbar spine, excessive extension in the lumbar spine, and really don't completely engage the core so that you have slight flexion in the lower back. Find that slight extended area that you can seep your hand through just a little bit, engage the core, and we're ready to move in this position, okay? Hands on top of shoulders, knees on top of hips, and from here, you can start with, once again, just extending that leg out while engaging the core still on, and holding this and right back up. If you find that easy, just like the bird dog, we can progress this to extending one leg, extending one arm, and engaging the core muscles there, and breathing, seeping air in and seeping air out, and back up. Other side. Extend and hold, engage the core muscles, and right back up. Just like that. Okay, so very similar to the bird dog position there, except we're on our back in this position, okay? And we're still alternating arms and legs, engaging our core, bracing, ensuring that we have a safe lower back, and we're moving, creating instability, and training our core effectively. The next exercise that I wanted to go over is called a bear hold, okay? And you can progress a bear hold into a bear crawl. Okay, so for this exercise, again, we're going to be taking a quadruped position here. I've got my hands under my shoulders, I've got my knees under my hips, and you guys already know, because we went over this prior to the bird dog, how to find your neutral spine. Find that pain-free neutral zone, okay? We've got a pain-free neutral spine here, and from here, I'm going to ensure that my toes are ready to be lifting myself off of the floor, essentially, and all I do from here is raise my knees up. Okay, so if you start in a position like this or something, then you're going to be all out of whack. But remember, our starting position was hands on our shoulders, knees underneath the hips. Okay, that's important to note here. Knees underneath the hips, neutral spine, engage, reach those thoracic spine muscles up to the ceiling just slightly, and find that neutral spine pain-free zone, and then we're lifting the knees up, and we're engaging and bracing down in this position here. So this is called the bear hold position. And once again, if you're doing it correctly and you're really bracing the abdominal musculature, then this will get challenging for sure. However, if you need more of a challenge, then we can progress this into something called a bear crawl. Now, to do this, we've got the exact same setup. So just as I went over there, hands underneath shoulders, knees underneath hips, and we're lifting up and engaging the core muscles, okay? From here, I'm going to imagine a glass of water on my lower back.
So when I lift up, I'm going to imagine a glass of water right here. And the goal is to not spill that glass of water. So what do you need to do to not spill that glass of water? Well, you need to keep your hips balanced, okay? So when we're going to start moving here in a second, side to side essentially, but we want to keep our hips and our shoulders balanced because we have that glass of water resting on this area here. And if you open up your hips too significantly to one side, which is essentially you making the exercise easier on yourself and compromising that neutral spine position, adding shear force, then essentially the glass of water tips over and you get the floor all wet. So you don't want to do that. You want to ensure that you're not spilling the glass of water and you're doing this exercise safe and effectively, okay? So we're up in this position, and to bear crawl, we're just doing this, just very, very slight movements. And notice if I had a glass of water on my back, and you can even move backwards if you like, I'm hoping that that glass of water would not spill, okay? So once again, neutral spine, bear hold position. And from here, we're just taking very, very small steps and bear crawling like this. And I've got a neutral spine, and that glass of water will not spill if you're doing it correctly. Do not start to lean those hips to one side or the other. Engage the core muscles. Keep the hips, the pelvis, and the shoulders stable and safe. The next exercise that we're going to go over today that I believe is essential in no matter what type of training you're doing is something called the front plank. And I believe we all know what the front plank is, but do we know how to do it correctly? Okay, so the first thing I want to go over is how to do the front plank correctly, and then how to get the most bang for our buck out of this exercise, because a lot of people just sit in this passively and rest on our structures kind of thing, and just go for time and try to do as long as possible without really thinking about what we're training, okay, if that makes sense. The first thing I want to mention, if you have shoulder pain, I wouldn't suggest you grabbing your fists like this. Oftentimes, if you're doing a front plank and you're grabbing your fist like this, then that may lead to anterior translation of the shoulder joint and slight internal rotation as well of the shoulder joint there. So I would suggest you packing your shoulder girdle and separating your fists slightly and ensuring that you have a stable shoulder joint here and you're pain-free, okay? So that's the first thing I'm going to mention in terms of form. Let's get right into it, guys. So we're out like this. I'm going to separate my fists just slightly here and ensure that I have a safe shoulder joint. And next thing I'm going to do when I get up in this position is ensure that I have a neutral spine. And we all know how to find that now. We've been through it enough. And so I'm up in this position here, and first of all, let's find our neutral spine. This is too much lumbar extension for me. This is too little, right? So I want to be somewhere in the middle here. Find that pain-free zone. Reach those thoracic muscles up to the ceiling. And now, if you think that you found your neutral spine, now we're engaging and squeezing as much as you can here. And so my glutes are turned on. My glutes are really engaged here. My core's turned on. And I'm reaching my thoracic muscles up to the ceiling. And I'm squeezing my fists really, really, really hard here. So already I'm working. All right, so that looks a lot different than what a lot of people will get in. And they'll just kind of be resting like this, either with their hips too low or their hips too high. Remember, separate the fists, engage the glutes, find that neutral spine, engage the glutes, engage the core, and reach those thoracic muscles up towards the ceiling so that you have an active glenohumeral joint as well. Let's get into that next exercise. So the next core exercises, the next two core exercises, kind of stem from that front plank position, and I would say are a little bit more advanced in nature. So if you've been struggling with some of the core exercises today already, then I suggest you kind of sit out of this time here and take a little break. And for the rest of us who kind of want a little bit more of a challenge, then let's try these out. So the first one we're going to go over is called a front plank with shoulder taps. And we'll do that out of a high plank. position just to show you that variation. You can do it out of a low plank or from your elbows, but we're going to do it out of a high plank position, front plank with shoulder taps. And the next exercise we're going to go over is called a rolling plank. And both difficult exercises, the rolling plank is going to stem from that front plank position, as I mentioned. Okay? So, front plank with shoulder taps, first of all. So, very similar setup to the front plank that we just went over, except I'm going to be on my hands, and I'm still going to find my neutral spine and brace my core efficiently, but I'm going to be up on my hands in a high plank position, okay? So just remember, find that neutral spine, pain-free zone, engage the core muscles, engage the glutes, right? And be nice and active in that position. And then from there, I'm going to be lifting up one arm like this. Didn't mean to hit the mic there. I'm lifting up one arm like this, okay? And back down. One arm like this and back down. And what is this doing? Once again, we're creating more instability. We're removing one of those bases of support there and really having to engage the core muscles to keep our shoulders and hips level. Now, how do I know if I'm doing this correctly? Well, I know if I'm doing it correctly if my shoulders do not move and they remain leveled while I lift one arm up and one arm up like this, and there's no movement in the shoulder joints. However, I know if I'm doing it incorrectly if I lift one hand up and I start to move to one side and my shoulders open up. And why do we do that? We know that if we're doing this, we're trying to make it easier on ourselves. Okay, so let's stay in this safe position here. Keep our shoulders nice and level. Touch and back down. Touch and back down. And as you get more advanced, you can hold. You know, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds and back down. 3 to 5 seconds and back down. Okay? But the most important thing is to remember to keep the shoulders and the hips level during this time. Okay? So, once again, we get in that high plank position, neutral spine, and brace. So the only thing that changes here is my feet. I'm going to want a larger base of support in my feet so that I can effectively do this exercise, and then I'm lifting up, just like this. And notice, there's no movement in my shoulders, or very little, or my hips. Okay, and as you get better, you can hold and back down. Now, once again, you're doing this incorrectly if you're in this position and you open up like this, okay? Because this is a resting position here. All right, so keep those shoulders and those hips level, touch, and keep everything engaged that we've talked about thus far. Now, let's get into that rolling plank. The rolling plank is going to stem from that front plank position. So we're going to be in that front plank position just like this, and then we're going to open up to a side plank and close back down to a front plank, open up to the other side plank. Okay, but the key is here that we want our shoulders and our hips to move at the same time. Okay, if you can picture that. Our shoulders and our hips will open up and close at the same time. So you know if you're doing this incorrectly if you open up your shoulders and then your hip opens up afterwards, or vice versa. You open up your hip and then your shoulder follows, okay? The difficult part of this exercise is to open up both at the exact same time and move back down in a safe neutral spine position without rotational forces onto the spine there, okay? So let's get right into it. Front plank position here. And again, this is a difficult one, so if you've never tried it, then don't be discouraged if it's more difficult than you expected. And we're in that front plank position, and from here, I'm going to really engage and brace down, and notice my shoulders and my hips are opening up at the same rate. And then when I'm closing back down to that front plank, they're moving at the same time here, and I'm returning to that front plank position. Again, opening up, notice they're moving at the same rate here, okay? And closing, again, at the same rate,
just like that. If I was doing it incorrectly, my hips would turn, my shoulders would turn. My shoulder would turn, my hip would turn. You guys get the point there. So move those hips and the shoulders at the same rate, at the same level through that movement there. It's a fun one. Let's move on. That was a fun one there today, guys. Thanks so much for joining me and sticking around all the way until the end of the video. I hope you've learned a few things about building your core and how to train your core most appropriately, effectively, and safely moving forward. I believe some of these things that you've learned today you can employ in your training right away to ensure that you're moving safely and bettering performance or optimizing maybe your rehab process. Now, I would suggest that you reach out to either your fitness instructors on base or your reconditioning specialist or reconditioning manager, depending on who you're working with, to ensure that you're receiving some appropriate fit principles. So what I mean by that is essentially how many reps should I be doing? How many sets should I be doing? What intensity? How long should I be holding these exercises, okay? And maybe they can give you some more guidance in terms of your own body mechanics as well. Okay, so reach out to them via phone or email on base and get some advice so that you can employ these tactics and have an individualized component as well prior to participating and adding these things to your regimen. So in review, we went over the Stu McGill Big 3 today. Which exercises did those consist of? Well, the side plank, the modified curl up, and the bird dog. So if there's 3 exercises that you guys are going to take away from this video and employ in your training, I would suggest those 3. Those are great core exercises that you can do towards the end of your workout and ensure that you're building your core appropriately. Okay? Now, the other exercises that we went over today are ones that I threw in there, and the more advanced of which were the rolling plank and front plank with shoulder taps as well. So remember, we're applying a lot of the same principles in all of these core exercises. I'm saying the exact same thing most of the time while teaching these things. What? Ensure that you have a neutral spine. Ensure that you're bracing. Ensure that you're engaging your glutes to set a neutral pelvis and you're not anteriorly tilting or posteriorly tilting that pelvis. Ensuring that you have a safe glenohumeral or shoulder joint. You're packing the shoulders appropriately. If we're doing movement in your general population, ensure that the shoulders and the hips move on the same plane. If you're adding instability to some of these exercises, like lifting off a couple bases of support in a bird dog, then making sure that your hips aren't opening up and adding rotational force to the lumbar spine, right? We want to keep the hips and shoulders level for the most part. Remember, the main function of the core is to what? Limit excessive or unwanted motion, right? So a lot of the time, the core's main function isn't to create movement, okay? Sometimes it is, but a lot of the time we want to train it in this type of context here, where we're limiting excessive or unwanted movement and we're practicing our brace position and our neutral zone, finding that pain-free neutral zone of our neutral spine there. And we can apply these tactics to our training right away to move safer and limit our risk of injury in the future. Anyways, rant over, guys. Thank you so much for joining me once again. I really appreciate it. Again, my name is Luke McMillan, and I'm the physical exercise specialist for Base Gagetown here. And I'll see you next video. See you later.